Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban from the Lean Blog, and this is a very belated episode number 34 of the Lean Blog Podcast. It's January 23rd, 2008. Our guest today will be Chris Harris. He's a former Toyota employee and the author of a book, Developing a Lean Workforce, a guide for human resources, plant managers, and lean coordinators. But before we get to Chris, I just wanted to apologize for the long gap. It's been about 2 months since the last episode, and a number of you have emailed and asked where I went. If you're not aware through the blog or other ways, I've written a book for Productivity Press called Lean Hospitals. And while I was writing that, the podcast unfortunately took a bit of a back burner, but I'm going to be back into podcasting mode now. I have episodes coming up in the next couple of weeks with David Meyer and Norman Bodek. I'm recording a new episode on January 27th with Jeffrey Liker about his new book, Toyota Culture. So if you have questions, you can contact me if you go to leanpodcast.org. There's information there about how to email me or even how to leave an audio question using the Skype service. So welcome back to the Lean Blog Podcast. As always, thanks for listening. Well, joining us here today on the Lean Blog Podcast is Chris Harris, joining us from South Carolina. It's great talking to you, Chris.
Good to be with you.
So your book, Developing a Lean Workforce, has been out for a little while now. I want to talk about that today, and I thought we could start. If you could tell us about your background, how you first got introduced to Lean and how you've progressed through your career with your Lean journey.
Yeah, well, I started on the assembly line at the Toyota plant in Georgetown, Kentucky, and started on the assembly line. I had a job. If I remember correctly, I had 55 seconds to do a job. It took me about 55 seconds, so it was a real interesting experience. I learned a lot about standardized work there. I kind of started my Lean journey right in the middle of as a production associate, and then after that, I graduated from college and went to be a frontline supervisor in a Tier 1 supplier to a big company, and that was an experience. That was a union shop where I had to relearn everything. I went from a very lean. I guess probably the leanest that you could be in was because Lean derives from the Toyota production system to a area that was not. And it was interesting. I learned a lot, learned how to deal with people, how to learn to deal with the union, and learned a lot of what not to do in a manufacturing environment. And then the interesting thing, which really kind of started me on the journey to writing, developing a lean workforce, was why I was at that job, was the training that I got. A guy walked me out. This is probably not exact, but this is awful close to what it was. He walked me out and said, "You see this yellow line?" I said, "Yes, sir." He walks me down 200 yards. He says, "You see this yellow line?" I said, "Yes, sir." He pats me on the back. He says, "Good luck, son." So that was about the extent of the training that I got.
Yeah.
And really one of the oddest things about that, which goes back into developing a lean workforce, was that the only requirement for me to have that job was that I had a college degree.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing was I had no idea what they made, their system to making it or anything like that. And all these people that had been working on the assembly line for years and years and years had much more knowledge than I did. So that really started me to ask the question of why that was when, and vice versa, I got a chance to go back to another company very closely related to Toyota Susho was the name of it, and started to learn about how Toyota promoted, and it was very much from within, the way I understood it, and that made a lot more sense to me. So I went back to Toyota Susho, where I dealt materials a lot. That was where our first book came out of, Making Materials Flow, which we published in 2003.
Right.
And then after that, I learned a lot about materials. So that was a really good experience. Had a good time. I worked a lot. After that, I went and spent some time in corporate purchasing for another Tier 1 supplier, another mass manufacturing organization, where I really learned how the entire supply chain is affected and how to deal with some of that, and also, again, what not to do.
Yeah, like, for example, how the supply chain, how the suppliers are impacted by how lean you are at the final production level?
Well, I think that the difference between having a supplier and a partner is a big one. I hear people say sometimes that doesn't matter, and I disagree, because a partner will do certain things for you that a supplier will not. And when I say supplier, that means you go out and you find the lowest piece price cost, and you may only have one part with that supplier. A partner is somebody that's got many, many parts of mine that I work with, and they work with me. Because many companies kind of miss that connection, that they're as healthy as their supply base is.
Right.
And that's a difficult connection to do. And then when we talk about materials, we talk about small pack sizes, frequent deliveries. We want our partners to carry a finished goods inventory. Things like that really make it easier when we're working close with a partner versus that supplier mentality of just getting lowest piece price cost.
Right. Some of that comes into the idea of longer-term relationships instead of just switching on a whim because someone else has a marginally cheaper unit price, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Any time that, well, there may be one rare time it doesn't, but in the majority of times, whenever you change something about a part, you change the supplier, you change anything, it disrupts the flow of material. Mm-hmm. And whenever the flow of material is disrupted, it costs me money.
Right.
So I want to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's another thing when we deal with partners, we can work some of that out. But then after that, when I started working with Harris Lean Systems in 2001.
Okay.
And we've been helping people implement lean principles, lean systems since 2000. Well, Harris Lean Systems has been doing it before I got there, but yeah. I came in 2001. And through that time, we started to learn, there's lots of stuff out there about how you create a manufacturing cells, how you move material, how you draw a value stream map, how you draw an office process value stream map, how you do all these different things. They identify kind of the 3 flows and the 7 ways and the 5 S's, but there was really nothing out there that prepared a workforce to go through this change. And I always operate under the assumption that if you're in a real rough environment, I would say that means that 95% of your workforce wants to meet expectations. Mm-hmm. I'd say if you're in an average environment, it's more like 98% want to meet expectations. But what we find ourselves is that we don't provide those expectations very well. So if we look at lean implementation, one of the things that we're going to need long term is the people to improve the process.
Right.
Now we've always kind of stuck to the thought that the implementation comes from the top to start, because somebody's got to say we've got to change to be competitive.
Right.
And then once they change and they start to put these things in place, once those systems are in place, we've got to rely on 2 main areas, in our opinion, to really improve the process. One is the person on the floor putting the stuff together, adding value to the product, the production associate.
Yeah.
The second one is the production supervisor, which, if you look at the production supervisor in today's environment, they spend most of their time scheduling and chasing parts.
Right.
They don't spend much time supervising. And one of the main tenets of a lean production system is how do we continually improve the process? Mm-hmm. And nobody knows more than the hourly production associate on how to improve that process. I don't think that you would get much argument on that, because they put the thing together every day. And we have to have a vessel to be able to take that information and make it happen. And that's the transformation we'd like to see the production supervisor transform into. More of a supervisory role than a scheduling and part chasing role.
Right.
How do they get those improvement ideas and make them work for the company?
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that we do, we also have to make sure that we prepare the people on the floor for this change. And that's where developing a lean workforce really talks about, first of all, who's going to lead this? Mm-hmm. Is it the lean coordinator, which that's the head lean person on site, whoever that is.
So that's sort of a specialist, a coach, or a trainer of sorts, right?
They are the person in the plant that is in charge of the implementation. They're in charge of making sure the implementation is moving forward, making sure it's moving correctly, which would encompass everything that you said as well.
Yeah.
Now, the person that owns the transformation would be the plant manager.
Okay, right.
So you got a person that owns the transformation, plant manager, and kind of the person that's the face of it, which is the lean coordinator.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, where that balance falls between, a lot of times a leader wants somebody to make them lean, and it sounds like what you're saying, the plant manager can't just offload that to the coordinator. It's got to be a partnership of sorts.
Well, I think the plant manager needs to realize that he's the one responsible whether it's going to go or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of leads him into choosing the lean coordinator that he can trust that's going to make this go forward.
Okay.
So I think, in essence, what you're saying is true. It's got to be a partnership, but the buck's got to stop somewhere. And we always say that the same reason that a lean implementation succeeds is the same reason that a lean implementation fails, and that's leadership.
Right.
So we always say the top person on site is the owner of the change, and a lean coordinator may be the face of the change because they're out on the floor and they're making the changes and they're doing the training and they're the person that you see all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of the first step that we talked about. And then the second one was, okay, we've got to get these people information on what's coming, why it's coming, because that's a big thing that most people miss is why are we implementing lean? We're not just implementing this to make your life miserable. We're implementing because we have to.
Right.
And that's something that really goes against what has happened in the past, because in the past there's been these flavor of the months that come through, and people get frustrated because they come in 3 months, they change everything, they go away. So we really felt that when you start to go down this path, you need to get the people together and tell them what's coming, why it's coming, why are you doing this? Is it your profit margins are dropping, competitiveness overseas? What is it? Why are you doing this? Make the argument for why you have to do this.
Right.
Because remember, we operate under the assumption that 95% of the workforce wants to meet expectations. So we've got to give them to them. So we go through, in developing a lean workforce, we go through this and say, these are probably the top 5 modules that you need to teach, and this is when you need to teach them. And here's what they include.
Okay.
For example, you got to do some kind of stuff that we would think is simple, but is very relevant. For example, how long is the training going to be? Because if you have an 8-hour training course, that's very hard on production. And then if you've ever sat through an 8-hour training course, which I'm sure you have, how much did you really get out of it? I mean, it's hard to comprehend that much material.
Sure.
So one thing that we try to do is say, let's have 1-hour blocks. Let's have a 1-hour block of training. That way we can get them in. We can say, this is what we're going to do. Tell them what we did. This is what we did. Did you get it? Okay, good. Now, the next thing is, when do you do the training? Well, we always say do the training about 2 days before you start the implementation of that training. That way they can go through the training, then they got a couple days to ask questions, know what's coming, and then they can be involved in the implementation. The next thing is, well, what is the training? Well, it has to be very focused because, for example, a value stream map, well, maybe I don't want the people on the floor drawing the value stream maps. I mean, if everybody on the floor could draw a value stream map and wanted to, that'd be great. But in actuality, probably not going to happen. But I really want them to be able to read a value stream map and know what it is when they start going up. So they don't have to ask questions, so they don't get bad information. One thing that we know is that in manufacturing facilities, as in any work facility really, any office, you have a flow of information. We usually call it like a grapevine or something. People talk. What we want to do is control the information that gets out there and put good information out as quick as possible as it's needed. That way they've got the good information. So take, for example, a value stream map. The value stream map 1-hour module would not focus on how you draw a value stream map. It would focus on what a value stream map says, why we do it, and what's going to happen with it. So you can do that in an hour. You can give people good understanding of what that is, and then they go back out prepared for what's coming.
Yeah. So teach them what their role is going to be in implementing changes, or to understand how and why different Kaizen opportunities were prioritized through the value stream map, things like that.
Yeah, things like that. Kind of a broad overview. Like a workplace organization 1-hour module. Well, you can cover the 5 S's enough to prepare them for what's coming. Then they can actually help you in the implementation.
Yeah.
Which kind of leads us, the order that we like to do the modules is Lean 101 first. Let me make an argument for what Lean is. The second is workplace organization, because that tends to be the most, I guess, passive may not be the right word, but it's not as intrusive as some of the others. I'm not coming in there and trying to tell you to change the way you do things. I'm just kind of trying to come in there and help you organize the area.
Yeah.
So that's a good way to start people into the change. And then value stream mapping, creating flow through manufacturing. What's one-piece flow? Why do we go from batch production to one-piece flow? What are those concepts? And then the last one that we do is material flow. How does the material flow? Why do we want material to flow? That kind of thing. What is your role in the material flow system? And each one of those, try to give them enough information that they can help us improve the process once it's in. And then after we talk about that and developing a lean workforce, we go to the job of the production supervisor. What is it now? What would we like it to be?
Right, because that's a tough transition for people, isn't it?
Oh, it's very, very difficult because we're going in and telling the production supervisor, who's really just been beaten up for years, and we're telling them that we don't want you to chase parts, we don't want you to schedule anymore. Well, now they don't know what their job is because that's what it's been for so long.
Yeah.
And we've got to really be careful how we do this. So we talk about the day in the life of two supervisors, and this is something that Rick was really instrumental in putting together because he has been in management in one of the big three as well as Toyota.
And this is Rick Harris, your co-author, and his relation to you is?
That's my father.
That's your father, right?
Yeah. Okay. I guess we're a Toyota family now. We're converted. We used to be one of the other big three, but now I guess we're a Toyota family.
Yeah.
And it talks about, well, in the mass manufacturing, this is what happens during the first period of the day, and in a lean facility, this is what happens. And it goes through, I think, eight different periods: before startup, after startup, before break, after break, right before lunch, after lunch. And it says, this is what the supervisors do in this environment, this is what's doing in this environment. And this takes a while because we want to transform those supervisors into what they are now, into an agent of really continuous improvement and supervisor, which entails going out, auditing the process, talking to the people, what do you need, how can we make this better? Okay, I can take care of that and get it done. That's what we want that job to be.
Okay. Which
kind of jumps us into the ending parts of that book is, how do I set up a system so I can promote from within? Because as I kind of started off the conversation earlier, when I went to be a supervisor at the Tier 1 facility, I didn't get any training, but all I had to do is have a college degree. Well, this is totally opposite, where we say, here's what we would really like for you to do. If you want to go from production associate to a team leader, you've got to go to these classes. You got to, on whatever they are, Tuesday, Thursdays, for 6 weeks, and you've got to go to these on the off shift. So if you work days, you got to go on second shift, and you don't get paid to go. So you're really making a sacrifice to go to these classes. So you go to these classes, you pass these classes, which are on your own production system, because at this point you're really not calling it a lean production system anymore. You're calling whatever your company is, it's your own production system. So you have to go to these, and once you pass all that, then you can apply for a team leader position. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get one.
Yeah, but if you're a candidate, even you go through that session. Do you have to be invited to go to that, or do you volunteer yourself that you want to be considered in the future for supervision?
That can vary with different facilities. My personal opinion is that I kind of like to let people apply.
Yeah.
Because if you've got enough initiative to apply and you go through the classes on your own time without getting paid on the off shifts, then I'm going to say, well, I'm willing to give you a shot.
Right.
Now, before you can do that, you have to have just a almost perfect attendance record. I mean, we've got to be able to rely on you, and you've got to be able to do every job within your team to tack time.
Right.
And those are a couple things. And then the group leader process is about the same thing. You have to be a team leader in good standing. You have to go to classes on time. And the thing about these is that when you do get a job, you probably have to go to an off shift. So if you were wanting to be a group leader and you applied for it and you got it and you were working first shift, you may have to go to second shift.
Right.
So there's real sacrifice to move up, but it comes from within.
Yeah.
So there's always that people real knowledgeable about the system.
Yeah. Now, do you have cases where you've been able to help a company transition from the old model to the new, where they already have existing supervisors? I assume is part of that transition, teaching the experienced supervisors how to operate differently, and then as openings develop, if people leave because they say, I can't handle this, new system, or if they retire, would you then start hiring from within and make that transition over time, or what do you see being effective?
Well, I don't know that there's a real good answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we've been through lots of lean transformations, and in every lean transformation, somebody chooses not to go along and they go ahead and leave.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's through retirement or something like that. What I would say is a positive note is sometimes the first step people will take is putting in team leaders. Because there's a big difference in the organizational structure between what you might see at Toyota and what you might see at a tier one
mm-hmm.
or mass manufacturing supplier. For example, when I was a supervisor in one of those facilities, you might be a supervisor over 50 people. It might be supervisor 50 people.
And that's the frontline supervisor. They've got a real broad span. Right. Yeah.
And you look at Toyota, and you have a group leader, then you have team leaders, then you have team members under the team leaders.
Yeah.
So it's really a supportive structure. And so sometimes what people do, and I've worked with some of these people and kind of talked with them and learned from them on what's effective, is that they're putting the team leaders in to help support the supervisor, and it's working that way.
Right, because the supervisor at a traditional company might be more like a group leader, a Toyota group leader in terms of scope, right?
Right, but without the team leaders.
Right, okay. Because the ratio, what's the usual ratio of a team leader to team member at a Toyota plant?
I would have to say it's been a long time since I worked on the assembly line.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like it was somewhere around. I would feel bad making a guess.
It's certainly
but it's a lot less.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm thinking 5, 6 to a team leader. Maybe
right.
I'm not sure though. Don't hold me to that.
Yeah, but
it was a lot less, and then you might have a group leader have 5 or 6 team leaders under them.
Yeah, well, that's what I've heard from others. I haven't worked directly in a Toyota environment, but that sounds about right.
And I'm sure it depends. I'm sure it probably varies per line, based on the difficulty of the line.
Yeah. So I'm
not sure about that.
And that seems like classic Toyota approach. Instead of having a rote, just set number, you pick the ratio that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then finally, the last thing that we end on developing lean workforce is how you get a new hire in, prepare them to be out to the floor within 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So you might come in the first day, just normal stuff, your pay, your benefits. The next day, you come in, we teach you Lean 101, then you go to the floor for a couple hours. Then you come back. Then we teach another workshop, then you go to the floor for a couple hours. And that goes on for less than 2 weeks. But by the time you're released to the floor, you can do 2 jobs up to the tack time or whatever time you have to do them. That way you can rotate with the team. You can be a team member.
Mm-hmm.
Versus in the past, hire them, throw them to the floor, and say, good luck. So that's kind of the approach we take with developing a lean workforce.
Yeah. Well, it's a really nice book. I enjoyed reading through it. It's it's a good book to read. It certainly seems like a good handbook to come back and refer to. And hearing your story, it sounds like you've got a real unique perspective that you started on the line, you've been a supervisor, you've worked in Toyota and non-Toyota environments, and I think that that comes through in the book. That that background leads to some interesting insights on things. So I certainly recommend the book. If people listening want to order the book, I'll have a link where you can order that through Productivity Press on the webpage for this episode of the podcast. Again, the title of the book is Developing a Lean Workforce. And Chris, if people want to get in touch with you and Harris Lean Systems, what's the best way for people to do that?
Probably by electronically. You can either go to our website, which is www.harrisleansystems.com.
Mm-hmm.
The email address is hls.inc@harrisleansystems.com. That's probably the best way to get in touch with us because we're on the road an awful lot.
Yeah.
But I'd like to thank you for what you do, for getting the message out. I appreciate it. I think we're doing a better job as a lean community getting the information out. It seems like a lot of people are wanting it more and more and more. So I appreciate what you do, and thanks for allowing me the opportunity to talk about the book, and I wish you the best.
Okay, well, thanks, and I appreciate your comments, and certainly appreciate you taking time out of a busy day to join us here on the podcast. So hopefully we can talk again soon.
All right.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.